Hi, folks. Welcome to News from the Rebellion, the podcast where we take a look at the newspapers from the North and the South during the time of the Civil War. Each episode will focus on an event either leading up to the Civil War or during the Civil War, and then we'll see what the newspapers had to say about that event from the Northern point of view in a Northern newspaper and from the Southern point of view in a Southern newspaper. In this episode, we'll take a look at how the newspapers reported on one of the first battles of the Civil War, the Battle at Philippi.
The Wheeling Intelligencer, Wheeling, West Virginia, Thursday, June 6, 1861. From Grafton. Particulars of the fight at Philippi. Special correspondence of the Intelligencer, Grafton, Monday night, June 3rd.
The excitement has been intense here all day about the action at Philippi, of which you are already apprised by telegraph. Ever since about 11 o'clock this morning, persons have been coming in from the scene of action, and at each new arrival, eager crowds would gather around to bear the latest version of the fight. Everyone tells the story a little different, and it is exceedingly difficult at this time to get an absolutely accurate account of the affair. Mr. Burdett came in from Philippi this evening, and from him and others I have gleaned a tolerably clear statement.
Yesterday morning at 10 o'clock, 4 regiments left here, in 2 divisions, one consisting of the 1st Virginia Regiment, part of the Ohio 16th, and the Indiana 7th, under command of Colonel Kelley, the other the Indiana 9th and the Ohio 14th, commanded by Colonel Lander, of Indian Fighting, Wagon Road, and Potter and Pryor dual notoriety. Colonel Kelley's division moved east by railroad to Thornton, a small way station 5 miles distant from here. Thence they marched to Philippi, a distance of 22 miles. The Indiana Regiment moved out the Northwest Virginia Railroad to Webster, where they were joined by the Ohio 14th, from which place they pushed forward on foot to Philippi, 13 miles distant. The march of the 2 divisions was performed last night through darkness, rain, and mud. It was a terrible undertaking, but they all went bravely through it, unshrinkingly and without complaint. All night they toiled on through the darkness and storm, the soft earth yielding beneath their feet, till the gray dawn found them in the neighborhood of the enemy. Colonel Lander reports that as they neared Philippi, they were discovered by woman who fired at him twice, and who sent her little boy across the hills, as he afterwards found, to apprise the enemy of their approach. He arrived on the hill across the river from, and below, Philippi, and commanding the town and the encampment, just below the town, a little before daylight this morning. They at once planted 2 pieces of artillery on the brow of the hill, just above the camp, and prepared to open on them when the time arrived. 4 o'clock was the hour at which the attack was to be made simultaneously by both divisions. Colonel Kelley was to attack them in the rear and cut off their retreat, while Colonel Lander would assault them in front. But Colonel Kelley's division was behind the appointed hour, owing to the terrible fatigues of their forced march of 22 miles. And in addition to this, they missed their point, and instead of coming in on the Beverly Road above Philippi and effectually cutting off all retreat, they came in, when they did come, just below the town. When the day began to dawn upon the impatient forces of Colonel Lander, it discovered to them the camp below in a state of commotion, evidently in great alarm and preparing for flight. The hour appointed for the attack came and passed, but still Colonel Kelley's division had not arrived. Impatient to begin the attack, and fearful that the rascals, almost within his grasp, should escape without smelling powder, Colonel Lander ordered the artillery to begin the attack, and at 4:15 the guns were unlimbered and dropped the first messengers of terror into the rebel camp, less than 1/4 of a mile away. Simultaneously with the roar of the first gun, Colonel Kelley, at the head of his command, came in sight across the river below the camp, and comprehending the position of affairs, they rushed forward at once in the direction of the camp. Meanwhile, the battery, having, after the first shot or 2, got an accurate range, played upon the camp with marked effect, tearing through tents and houses at a fearful rate. This the chivalry couldn't stand, and they scattered like rats from a burning barn. They had no time to retreat in order. They didn't even retreat at all. They ran, fled, most ingloriously, ran like sheep in every direction that promised safety. After firing a random and scattering volley, which did no damage whatsoever. Colonel Kelley's command was close after, the Virginia troops in advance, the Henry Clay Guards in front, and Colonel Kelley and Captain Fordyce lending. At the same time, Colonel Lander's force came rushing down the hill to the bridge, and they all put out after the fugitives, yelling like Indians. But the legs of the fugitive chivalry served them too well, and they could not be overtaken by our already exhausted men, who, after chasing them a couple of miles, returned to the evacuated camp to learn the painful fact that their victory, though complete, was dearly, too dearly, bought. Colonel Kelley, who, with a bravery amounting to rashness, was foremost from first to last, was rallying his men in the upper part of the town, the enemy having all apparently fled, when he fell by a shot from a foe concealed either behind a fence or in a house. Some say the assailant fired from behind wagon, others that Colonel Kelley was pressing him hard with a view of capturing him when he wheeled and fired. This is not substantiated. At any rate, the shot was fired after the engagement was over, and was just such a piece of assassination as that by which fell the loved and lamented Ellsworth. The assassin was an assistant quartermaster in the Confederate force. His name is Sims, and he hails from Chesterfield, across the river from Richmond. He was immediately seized, and it is a great wonder they didn't make mincemeat of him in Tantor. The pistol with which he shot Colonel Kelley is an old-fashioned, old Virginia Borsay pistol, carrying a very large ball, and indicating a most dangerous wound. The ball entered the left breast, and passing clear through lodged beneath the skin, just underneath the shoulder blade. It has been extracted, and every attention of the highest medical and surgical skill is lavished upon the wounded officer. If human skill can save him, he will be saved, but if he is beyond the reach of human aid, he will die. And he said today to a friend who bent over his couch, in a just and glorious cause. "I expect I shall have to die," said the wounded colonel. "I would be glad to live if it might be, that I might do something for my country, but if it cannot be, I shall have, at least, the consolation of knowing that I fall in a just sauce." In the gray, uncertain light of the morning, it was impossible to tell anything about the loss of the enemy, as they carried away in their bite whatever killed and wounded they may have had. They will bury them secretly, I suppose, as they did on Sullivan's Island. It is very certain that somebody was hurt, and right badly, too. A leg, which had been torn off by a cannonball, was picked up in the camp. There was a great deal of blood upon the ground, and all along the ground in the direction of the flight, on the fences, and on everything in the way of the indiscriminate retreat. Hate blankets, cloaks, and every imaginable description of luggage were scattered along the road for more than a mile. I saw one of the secession hats, with a veritable cockade, which a chap was wearing around town today with a great deal of gusto. The hat and epaulets of Colonel Porterfield, the secession commander, were picked up in the road. The rebels left behind some 40 horses, all their provisions, their baggage, and camp equipage, and a good many some uniforms, together with some 440 stand of arms, all of which fell into the hands of the victors. Several prisoners were taken besides Sims, among them D.M. Auvel, prosecuting attorney, and the long-looked-for taken at last, Colonel Willie, of Burnt Bridge fame. He professes to be terribly unwell, and he ought to be, if he fully appreciates his situation. Captain Robinson, of the Logan Guards, had the honor of making the capture. Colonel Willie's commission from the Confederate authorities, with some interesting correspondence, was found upon his person. Several hats, apparently belonging to officers, were picked up, and a horse and buggy belonging to B.F. Martin, a Pruntytown lawyer and defeated secession candidate for the legislature, were part of the spoils. Thomas Sergnor, the inimitable Tom, as Bill Cooper used to style him, captain of the Barber forces, as he styles himself, and late editor of the Barber Jeffersonian, at the first approach of danger, made tracks. He ran with all the speed the shortness of his legs would permit, and his fear lent him wings, be managed to get out of harm's way. The American flag has taken the place of the secession emblem in all the houses of Philippi. Several of these piratical flags were captured. The people were coming in from the country and expressing their gladness at the change of colors. Word was received here this evening that Colonel Kelley's wound was not so dangerous as at first apprehended. It is to be hoped it is not. He is a brave and good man, universally beloved by officers and soldiers, and by everybody who knows him. He speaks in terms of the highest commendation of the troops under him. He says better or braver men never lived than his Virginia regiment. In this Philippi expedition, they were placed in the front, and thus brought more immediately into action than the others, who only lacked the opportunity to prove themselves equally gallant. The Henry Clay Guards, under Captain Fordyce, who were in the front rank, especially distinguished themselves. The rest of Colonel Kelley's command had not the same opportunities. Neither had Colonel Lander's command, for the fugitives were out of sight before they could get to them. Not a man on our side, so far as heard from, except Colonel Kelley, was hurt. There is an universal sadness at his unfortunate fate. His loss will be severely felt, even should he ultimately recover. A rumor prevails this evening that the fugitives have been reinforced by 300 Southern troops, but it is not credited. A detachment of Ohio troops went out to Philippi this afternoon under Colonel Andrews, who will take command there. An artillery company arrived this evening, bringing 4 brass field pieces. The 2 pieces now at Philippi belong to this company.
Harper's Weekly, New York, New York, July 6, 1861. The Battle at Philippi. We illustrate on this page the Battle of Philippi, which took place on 3rd June. We published an account of this brilliant little affair in a recent number, and here we will only add that a few companies of Indiana, Ohio, and Virginia volunteers entirely demolished a large force of secessionists assembled at Philippi under the command of Colonel Porterfield, driving them out of the place, with the loss of all their baggage and most of their arms. Our artist writes, "The scene shown in the picture is the principal street in Philippi. The large building on the left is the courthouse of Barber County, Virginia, now occupied as the headquarters of the federal troops. The roof of the hotel just beyond the courthouse shows plainly the effects of a cannonball. I was told that it carried away a secession flag. The Union flag is now floating in its place. The road between the courthouse and hotel is the one by which Colonel Kelley entered the town. The intention was for him to have come in by the road, which you see turning to the right at the extreme end of the picture. About a stone's throw beyond this turn is where Colonel Kelley fell."
The Bedford Inquirer, Bedford, Pennsylvania, Friday, June 7th, 1861. Battle at Philippi. Virginia secessionists routed by Virginia Unionists. Colonel Kelley killed. 15 secessionists killed. Cincinnati, June 3rd. 2 columns of troops, commanded by Colonel Kelley, of the 1st Virginia Union Volunteers of Wheeling, and Colonel Crittenden of Indiana, left Grafton early last night, and after marching about 20 miles through a drenching rain, surprised a camp of 2,000 Confederate troops at Philippi, Virginia, a town in Barber County on Tygart Valley River. The surprise was complete, the Confederates fleeing and leaving 15 dead bodies on the field. The Union troops captured a large amount of arms, horses, ammunitions, provisions, and camp equipage. At the last advices, the Federal troops were in hot pursuit of the Confederates, and there will probably be many of them taken prisoners. Colonel Kelley was mortally wounded and has since died. Several others of the Federal troops were slightly wounded.
Chicago Daily Tribune, Chicago, Illinois, June 18, 1861. Important from Western Virginia. Special dispatch to the Cincinnati Gazette. Grafton, Sunday night, June 16th, and there is a gradual concentration of forces in the direction of Philippi. The 14th Ohio returned there from Buckhannon. There is a report of a fight at Buckhannon, with considerable loss to the rebels, but it is not authenticated. It comes by way of Clarksburg. The 16th Ohio is held ready to move at any moment. A number of rifled cannon have arrived from Ohio, with a large amount of ammunition. A portion of these supplies were immediately sent to Philippi. Enfield rifles arrived for the flank companies of Ohio regiments. Captain Benham is back from Washington, and he has gone tonight to Philippi, leaving here at dusk. The rebels made an attack on Piedmont. The Indiana Zouaves are all at Cumberland again, and communication is open. There are some apprehensions there from rebels dispersed at Romney, with reinforcements from the direction of Harper's Ferry. There is unusual activity at headquarters and towards Cheat River. Scouts are out in every direction and are constantly reporting. The rebels are known to be occupying Hattonville and Beverly. A scouting party is out tonight, looking after a small force of rebels said to be in the neighborhood. The remains of Captain Crawford, shot by the sentry at Philippi, are here tonight under escort for Ohio. Colonel Kelley is greatly improved. He was getting up today. A company of cavalry at Morgantown is reported as organized for self-defense. The rebels at Cheat Mountain Gap are under command of General Jackson, formerly judge at Parkersburg. Porterfield is still among them, in some capacity. Accounts of their strength vary greatly, but none put it under 3,000. Grafton, 12 o'clock m. A messenger just in from Philippi announces that our scouts have discovered the rebels marching toward Philippi and that they expect an attack in the morning. The report is hardly credited, though the information is positive.
Richmond Daily Dispatch, June 7, 1861. The latest news, the recent battle at Philippi. Our reporter conversed yesterday evening with Dr. J. A. Hunter of the Virginia Army, who had just arrived from Staunton, where most of the circumstances attending the recent engagement between the Virginia and Washington forces at Philippi were known, the news having been brought thither by special express. Mr. Bledsoe of Staunton arrived also in Richmond yesterday evening with dispatches concerning the battle, sent by General Harmon to the governor, the nature of which we were not permitted to find out. Dr. Hunter entertains no doubt that the ground was most gallantly contested by the Virginians, who fought with the odds of 700 against from 1,500 to 3,000 of the abolitionists, who were aided by certain traitorous Union men in that region. By the sheer force of numbers, the enemy were enabled to surround and get possession of the train. In the capons were unopened cases containing 500 muskets. A desperate attempt was made by the Virginians to recover the arms. Then arms were used with effect on the marauders, but they could not be dislodged. They, in turn, knew our brave troops, who retreated in good order, and halting at a bridge, offered a most determined resistance. Many instances of individual bravery and acts of heroism are recorded in connection with the attack on the bridge. At this point, the abolitionists got their field battery in operation when a charge was made on them, in which Captain Archie Richards of Bath, Thomas E. Sims, for multi-ticket agent on the Danville RR well known here, and Dangerfield of Bath were killed, and several desperately wounded. A brother of the Dangerfield who was killed, as above mentioned, both of whom belonged to the Bath Cavalry, had his leg carried off by a cannon shot. Mr. Turk, for High Sheriff of Augusta, together with those mentioned as slain, showed the most determined bravery. The Virginians were finally dislodged from the bridge and were driven back on a locality called the Willow, where they repulsed a savage onslaught on their position, and besides were enabled to inflict much damage on their enemies, who defend from further offensive operations. The most reliable advice is place the loss in killed on our side at 7, the wounded at from 15 to 25. Of the abolitionists, it is said from 50 to 75 are certainly known to be dead, and a large number wounded. One Kelley, a Yankee Renegade from Wheeling, who commanded a Union regiment of congenial cutthroats, was so lucky as to end his ignoble life in the Union. Dispatches to Northern papers represent him as an arrant coward, and seem to rejoice that the chances of battle have obviated the necessity of his future appearance on any active field. Another account received differs somewhat from the above. It says that the Virginia forces were under Colonel Porterfield, and contained of 300 men, that they were attacked by 1,100 or 1,500 of the enemy, and repulsed them 3 times, our men remaining masters of the ground. 8 of our men were killed, among others Colonel Porterfield himself, and Mr. Thomas E. Sims of the Commissary Department. There were between 50 and 60 of the enemy killed. While we regret the loss of valuable men in an encounter with so ignoble and depraved an enemy as they had to contend against in this instance, we must enter our decided protest against the easy manner in which it appears the whole force were at first surprised. In peace at times, eternal vigilance is the price of liberty. In war, it is the price of liberty and success. If we are surprised by our enemies asleep on our post, we deserve defeat. The following account of the affair has also been furnished us. The Virginia forces at Philippi allowed themselves to be surprised. They were awakened early in the morning by the cry that the enemy was upon them, and by the firing of a cannon the enemy had brought along. They immediately beat a retreat, the enemy in pursuit. About 4 or 5 miles out of town, a part of them made a stand and were attacked by the enemy. They repulsed him. The attack was twice repeated, and the enemy as often repulsed. The enemy then desisted from the pursuit, and our forces came off, sustaining a loss of 6 men, among them Mr. Sims of this city. In the hurry of leaving the town, our men left 500 stand of arms which had not yet been unboxed. They brought away all their own arms. The loss of the enemy was some 50 or 60. Our force was about 900 strong, the enemy supposed to be 1,500. It is thought Colonel Porterfield, the officer in command of our forces, was killed. Also a Mr. Dangerfield, of Bath County. The town might have been easily defended if our men had not slept on their posts.
The Daily Dispatch, Richmond, Virginia, June 7th, 1861, the Battle at Philippi.
Elsewhere we give such particulars as we have been able to give of the Battle of Philippi. It will be seen that our troops, attacked by immense odds, covered themselves with glory, and if it was a physical impossibility to hurt back such a vast superiority of numbers, nevertheless, our Spartan band kept them at bay, under circumstances in which few but Southern men would have made any fight at all. If the North considers such a battle a victory, it pays a tribute to Southern valor which it would be hardly willing to offer in its right mind. If it only expects to be able to hurrah when, with forces of 3 or 4 to 1, it can barely hold its own, it utters a sarcasm upon its own capacity more biting than any that ever escaped the lips of its enemies. We have to lament the loss of some noble men, one Thomas D. Sims, so well known and highly esteemed in our community. He fought like a lion, and he leaves behind him a name which will be precious and glorious to his family and his country.
Staunton Vindicator, Staunton, Virginia. Volume 17, number 23. June 7, 1861. Condition of the North-West border. The present condition of things in our state, which was anticipated by those who in February last voted against the reference back to the people of the Ordinance of Secession, proves the wisdom of that vote. They loved the people and their rights better than to expose them to the dangers of such a reference, and it is remarkable that here, and all over the state, the vote against reference was given by the constant and earnest advocates of popular rights, but who were unwilling that their liberties and lives should be jeopardized by the exercise of that right in a way to endanger them. What is the result? The vote on ratification has been taken in the midst of war, and in the face of a vigilant and unscrupulous enemy, who had the whole state filled with his spies, and that enemy, through information derived from the polls, has been made aware of every opponent of state rights, and his location. It would have been just as wise to have furnished Abraham Lincoln with a list of his friends in Virginia, their names, locality, and showing where he could find aid and comfort among us. The noble old state has gone by a majority of some 150,000 for secession, but Lincoln has been told by the pretended lovers of popular supremacy that one little corner of our state is by heavy majorities opposed to her sovereignty, and that too on its border, most exposed to invasion. By that fatal vote on ratification, the record of the Northwest shows Mr. Lincoln the names of his friends, and how quickly has he availed himself of the information. His armies are already there, and our brave defenders, our own sons and brothers, are in imminent danger. The latest intelligence from that quarter informs us that our little force at Grafton have been compelled to retreat from that place to Philippi, before superior numbers of the Northern forces, thus leaving the Baltimore and O Railroad from Wheeling nearly to Harper's Ferry, in undisputed possession of the enemy, and that on Monday morning last, our men were surprised and driven from Philippi, with the loss of several lives, many arms and all their stores, and that they have now retreated to Beverly, in Randolph County. This news is somewhat mitigated by the intelligence that by a brave stand of Captain Mumaw's company, and perhaps others, in a wood some 2 miles from Philippi, the enemy were surprised in turn, and driven back with great loss. 5 of our men are said to have been killed, and about 60 or 80 of the enemy in the conflict. But we have lost our position, and the loss of arms and provisions must have left our little force in bad condition. There is an old saying that holds good in all the affairs of life, but especially in war, that whatever is worth doing at all is worth doing well. If our northwestern border is not to be given up to the northern enemy, surely some efficient reinforcements should be sent there at once. We are informed that the condition of our little force there has been hitherto most disheartening. With no artillery, and not more than 10 rounds of powder for the small arms, Our men, too, raw and undisciplined, and badly officered. One of the brave men who brought the news of the retreat from Philippi expresses the conviction that a well-appointed force of 2,500 men could master in sheer mountain passes any number that might be sent against them. We appeal to our readers to know whether the protection of the loyal men of our border, and the relief from alarm, and the danger of incursions of those further in the interior would not justify such a force in the northwest, and another of the same size in the west. Our fighting men have been drawn from among us to the east and to Harper's Ferry, so as to leave all West Virginia in a very defenseless condition. Without this fact, without more vigilance on the part of the War Department, invite our invasion, or at least expose our population to alarm and panic. We hope the able heads of our War Department will have an eye to these things.
Richmond Enquirer, Richmond, Virginia, June 7th, 1861. Battle at Philippi. 15 Virginians killed. Colonel Kelley killed. Baltimore papers of Tuesday came to hand last night. They contain the following details of a fight at Philippi, Virginia, but as the report is by the way of Cincinnati and has undergone the revision of the federal authorities, it must be taken with many grains of allowance. Cincinnati, June 3rd, 2 columns of troops commanded by Colonel Kelley of the 1st Virginia Union Volunteers of Wheeling and Colonel Crittenden of Indiana left Grafton early last night and after marching about 20 miles through a drenching rain, surprised a camp of 2,000 Confederate troops at Philippi, Virginia, a town in Barber County on the Tygarts Valley River. The surprise was complete, the Confederates fleeing and leaving 15 dead bodies on the field. The Union troops captured a large amount of arms, horses, ammunition, provisions, and camp equipage. At the last advices, the Federal troops were in hot pursuit of the Confederates, and there will probably be many of them taken prisoners. Colonel Kelley was mortally wounded and has since died. Several other of the Federal troops were slightly wounded. Confirmation of the battle. Washington, June 3rd. General Scott received a dispatch tonight from General McClellan announcing that a part of the command of General Morris last night advanced from Grafton during a heavy rain and surprised the secession camp near Philippi, about 2,000 strong. They were effectually put to rout and a number of them killed. A large quantity of arms and munitions and a number of horses, which the secessionists left in their alarm, fell into the hands of the Federal troops. They retreated further into Virginia. Colonel Kelley was mortally wounded. A gentleman just arrived from Washington informs us that the report of a battle is false. A skirmish, however, had taken place near the point named, in which Colonel Kelley was killed. Further evidence of the incorrectness of the report is that there were no horses of any account in or near Philippi. The probability is that on the arrival of reliable information from our own forces, we shall have altogether another coloring to this affair. Editor's Enquirer.
Richmond Daily Dispatch, June 20th, 1861. Who shot Colonel Kelley? Colonel Kelley, the commandant of a portion of Lincoln's forces at Philippi, was shot by Archie McClintock of the Bath Cavalry Captain. Richards, Leroy and Foxall Dangerfield, brothers, and Archie McClintock, soldiers of the Bath Cavalry, were at the bridge when a horse belonging to their company dashed through the bridge without its rider, whereupon these soldiers attempted to cross the bridge for the purpose of seeing what had been the fate of the owner of the riderless horse, when they were met by a portion of the enemy, led on by Colonel Kelley. As they met, Archie McClintock shot Kelley with a pistol. Seeing that they would be overcome by the number of the enemy, this gallant trio wheeled and retreated through the bridge. As they were retreating, they heard the enemy exclaim, "Shoot the J.D. rascal on the white horse," meaning McClintock, who had shot Kelley. They fired and broke the leg of Leroy P. Dangerfield. As McClintock was able to unhorse the colonel of a regiment with an old pistol, we hope that no soldier will disdain to use the old-fashioned pistol. They are as good as any, if in proper hands. Staunton Spectator.
Well, that's our show for today, folks. Thanks for tuning in, and if you enjoyed the show, please subscribe.